So what we are going to address today is the fact that, is Gary Griffith on here? Not on yet?
Yes, he is.
Okay. So Gary, I'm going to have you jump in. We have been talking about this with our international offices, and of course we've been talking about it locally as leaders, that certainly, as fabulous as the market is, it is obvious that this cannot go on forever, and that there will be shifts and changes in the economy as a whole, and certainly then in our industry. So because we've been in the business as long as we have, we wanted to have a special session with those of you who have not been through an economy like this, or what like we're anticipating, where we will possibly be looking at short sales, foreclosures, ultimately possibly real estate owned properties called REOs. And so before we dive in, I'm going to have Gary give you what are the things that are the signs that are telling us, okay, we need to get ready now. This is not going to happen tomorrow. It may not even happen by the end of the year, but it's going to happen probably at some point in 2021. And so I want Gary, if you will open up like you did yesterday for our folks, that would be great. And then
I'll be more than happy to.
And we'll go from there.
Alrighty. Sounds great. For us, meeting today has to do with the fact that I reported that over 42% of the people who have mortgages did not make mortgage payments. We have an indeterminate amount of people that are in forbearance agreements on their mortgage or delaying payments. We still have 50, 60 million people that are out of work. We do not know how many of those are going to come back online and be gainfully employed again in the future. Things are so uncertain, and yet at the same time we are having a record-breaking sales. Everything looks like it's going hunky-dory, but it's not going to last. It can't last. There comes a day where the piper needs to be paid. House payments are going to have to be made. There may be chances to have mortgages modified and things like that. All this stuff will be discussed by the panel. But what we need to be ready for is the fact that there is a possibility for distinct possibilities that we are going to enter into a period where there will be foreclosures and or short sales coming on the market. It will have an effect on market value. It will have an effect on prices of homes. It will have an effect on who is qualified to buy a home now, because the people who have lost their homes may no longer be in the market as potential buyers in the market.
Gary, I'm going to pause you for just a second. Everybody, please mute. And the only time you're going to unmute is if you want to say something, because the background noise is causing reverberation and it's disturbing to everybody else. Thank you. So, I'm going to pause you for just a second. Everybody. Does everybody know what I mean by muting yourselves?
Debbie and Kathy, if you have the ability to mute everyone, if you see that on your screen.
Okay, let's try this again. Gary, you can speak. What? Okay, Gary, are you hearing me?
You cut out on me. Am I still talking?
Yeah, we were kind of getting.
You're cutting in and out, Gary.
Are you on your phone or on your computer?
I think we lost him because.
Am I back on? Are we okay?
Okay, so I'm gonna move from Gary right now. I'm gonna introduce the panel. And then Kenny, after I introduce the panel, I'd like to start with you and your comments that you made yesterday, and then we'll just open up. So our panel today is Kenny Tate, Jessica Scott, Susan Olivares, and Jen Sanders. And all four of these people have been in the business for a significant amount of time, and they've had experience in all or one of these areas, deep dive experience. So I consider them our experts in talking with all of you about what we're looking at and how you navigate through it. And we're gonna after I have a few comments from them, then I'm gonna pause for a minute and preface it with some thoughts, and then we'll open it up for questions and dialogue. So Kenny, if you'll go ahead and kind of mirror what you said yesterday, because it was good.
Okay, so one of the things that I talked about yesterday is general overall economic conditions, and sometimes we don't pay enough attention to that in terms of what we think is coming down the road. So on an average year, the annual budget of the United States is roughly somewhere in the neighborhood of about $4.5 trillion with a T. Coronavirus aid and government spending related to relief efforts are estimated to be somewhere between $6 and $7 trillion before this is all over with. When you dump that kind of money into the system, there is no way to avoid inflation. Can't happen. The question is, when does that all hit? So in addition to what Gary's talking about, where we already have folks who are not making payments at this point, coupled with what's going to come down the road, which will be inflationary pressure, which will put more strain on people's household budget. The price of your bread and milk and electricity and you name it is going to go up. So it's going to further make things difficult for people who are already having some difficulty in making those payments. So at some point down the road, kind of like he said, we have to pay all this back, and we're going to pay it back with inflationary dollars, which is going to strain the market. So there is no way to avoid what's coming. It's just a matter of how severe is it when it gets here, and when does it get here?
Okay, great, thank you. So
Susan?
Yes.
I was going, Jen and I were talking this morning, before we dive into this too deeply, because we've got so many levels of experience on the call, could we do definitions? Let our panel just do definitions, like what is a short sale, what's a pre-foreclosure, what's a foreclosure, what's forbearance, what's loan modification. So we kind of all have the same base, so we can do a deep dive like we did yesterday, which I think would be so helpful to everybody. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great idea. So how would you like them to start, Debbie?
Well, Susan Olivares is known as the short sale queen. So Susan, why don't you give us a definition of what a short sale is?
Well, a short sale just means that someone, if they sold their house today, it would sell for less than what they owe the bank. So any sale of their property is subject to bank approval.
So it's really an oxymoron, isn't it? Because short sales don't happen shortly, do they?
It's short on money, not short on time.
Go into that a little deeper. What do you mean not short on time?
Well, just the short sale process, waiting on the lender to approve a short sale takes quite some time. There's a process where the person that has the mortgage has to be approved, has to supply documentation of their hardship, financial information. And in the past, that was quite burdensome, and the lenders had so many short sales that they would lose the documents, and then you would have to resubmit them. And so I have closed a short sale as short as 30 days, but I've also worked on them for 2 years. So it takes a while.
It takes a while, and it takes expertise for the person, the agent, to be able to navigate that, not only with the client, but with the lenders, correct?
That's true. That's true. And while there are some federal guidelines that the lenders have to follow, the processes can be different for each lender.
Okay, all right.
And each type of loan.
Okay, all right. And I want to add here that if any of you in the audience have the book Shift, if you will read pages 227 through 233, it will give you an in-depth review of what a short sale is, what it looks like, what it takes to navigate it, what you would need to take part in order to be the consultative professional for your client. Okay, Debbie, who's next?
Oh, can I ask Susan a question about definitions real quick?
Sure.
Okay, so you had talked about once restructuring when a client restructures their loan and what that looks like, and it didn't sound very good, and I'm trying to remember. And I know there's probably a lot of people that are doing that right now when they're behind.
I think, Chandra, you might be referring to a modification, a loan modification.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And right now, there's a new word of forbearance, and the forbearance, because of the CARES Act, is allowing people to not make their payment for 180 days, and potentially it can be up to 360 days. And the forbearance is a different process, a newer process with the CARES Act, versus it used to be loan modification, then short sale, then foreclosure. So this forbearance is a newer term and giving some people more leniency. And right now, FHA extended the foreclosure and eviction moratorium to August 31st of 2020. So as far as short sales, foreclosures, I don't believe we'll see anything till after that time.
Does the forbearance just pause their loan, or do they have this balloon payment at the end of it?
So they are calling it a junior lien, and may or may not have added, there may not be interest tacked on and all of that. I don't think they've truly determined exactly how the forbearance will have to be repaid, but we do know when a property sells, that money will have to be repaid.
Chandra, a while back, the information was put out that there were 3 ways that they would be looking at the deferred payments. One was that it would possibly be tacked on to the end of the loan. The other was that there would be divided monthly payments. In other words, that lump sum would be divided and added back to the original monthly payment for a period of months. And then the other one was a balloon payment. And that's probably something that'll have to be negotiated with between the servicer and the borrower. during this process. So, but those were the 3 initially that they had planned to be looking at.
Jessica, do you have something?
Yes, ma'am. So now think about people missing their payments and them tacking it on the end or increasing their payment, how hard it's going to be for people to still catch up after that fact. That's going to trigger even more short sales and then into foreclosures later, adding to our shift.
Okay. Debbie, did I cut you off? Did you have something you wanted
No,
to?
not at all. I was just gonna, if we're ready, I was gonna move on to pre-foreclosure and foreclosure. Jen Sanders, where are you? Can you elaborate on those? And then I think we just talked about forbearance and loan modification. Now I'll be quiet and y'all take it away. Jen, are you available?
Yeah, I'm here. So if you think about foreclosure is a legal term, so it's a legal event that happens when the property is sold at the courthouse steps, is the way it works in Oklahoma. So when we use the word foreclosure, a lot of times we think we're talking about like bank-owned properties or REO properties, but a foreclosure is the legal process of where the bank takes ownership of the property when you stop making your payments. And so if someone said, if you're truly buying a foreclosure, you're truly like going to the courthouse steps and bidding there, is the way it works in Oklahoma. The term pre-foreclosure, I think, is it's really just a marketing term in my mind that Zillow or Trulia use, right? Like they kind of made it up. And so if you have a buyer that brings you a property that they'll find on Zillow or Trulia that says pre-foreclosure on it, that simply means that the homeowner of that property has missed enough payments that their lender has filed a document at the courthouse giving that owner notice that, hey, if you don't get caught up, we're going to proceed with the foreclosure. So those are public records, and there are services that sell the information from public records. So basically Zillow and Trulia buy that information from some information source and then go out and advertise those people's houses as if they're for sale, which would be really infuriating, I think, if I owned one of those houses. But that's when a buyer brings you a pre-foreclosure, that's really what all that is. You can sometimes those terms will overlap with a short sale, because the reason for doing a short sale at the very core root of it is to avoid the legal courthouse foreclosure. Make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
So
Jessica, Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, actually. We don't do short sales for the profit. We talked about yesterday, I do it for like community service. We're trying to help the seller stay from foreclosure. We're trying to help the buyer get a good deal. We're trying to salvage the process. So if an agent thinks that they can do short sales and make a lot of money, they're definitely barking up the wrong tree with that, because they are very hard. They can take a lot of time. They can fail, and they can be successful as well. The other thing I was going to say is, Jenny had said this yesterday, we talked about it, stay in your lane. If you're not comfortable with a short sale, or if you don't understand them, refer it to someone who does. They're very difficult. There's a high liability with them. What is your time worth with this? If you're not good at doing it, don't try to take it on and end up putting someone into foreclosure when you can refer it to an expert, still make a little bit of money, and then let it be taken care of. Just a couple of things.
Okay. Kenny, you put something in the chat. Will you talk about that?
Yeah, that's just the official name of the first document. In a foreclosure, they file a lis pendens. And so when Zillow or Trulia or whoever is telling you that they have pre-foreclosures, that's all they've done is they've done a courthouse search. They've seen any lis pendens filed, and then they've listed that as a pre-foreclosure. Doesn't mean that the seller can't go back and do all the things we've already talked about. Once that's filed, that finally gets a lot of people reacting to something, and they'll go in and at that point try forbearance or modification or something of that nature. And of course, Zillow and Trulia never update those things, so you'll see all kinds of stuff where people are going, hey, it says it, but that's the name of the document.
Okay, that's good information. Jen Sanders, I want to come back to you for a minute. Where does, you know, I think Debbie was telling us yesterday that, and I think it was just a couple of years ago, that you in 1 year sold over 100 HUD properties.
Yeah.
Where does HUD fit in all this?
So if you take so we just did the definition of, I'm looking at my notes because I wrote them down. We did forbearance, and think of it in a line, a timeline. So forbearance would be your first option right now if you can't make your payment in this current climate. Then somebody goes to possibly a loan modification if that doesn't work. Or if you were with me, I'd say skip that and go straight to short sale to try to avoid the foreclosure. But if your short sale doesn't work, then you end up in a foreclosure. And if the bank forecloses on the property, they typically will buy those back at the courthouse steps. And then that's when you have REO properties. So those are the foreclosure properties that we will get paid on. Basically, as a buyer's agent, if your buyer wants to buy a foreclosure, it's the ones you see on MLS that are called REO, which stands for real estate owned. Or we also call them bank owned, we call them foreclosure, we call them lender owned. That's all kind of one little group. So within that subgroup of REO properties, there are all different owners of properties. So if you had a VA mortgage, now the VA probably owns the property. If you had an FHA backed mortgage, what ends up happening is that HUD owns the property. And so those are the HUD foreclosures that you'll see listed on, and those are listed on MLS. And then you place your bids at the HUDhomestore.com website, so at the government's website. But that's when you start hearing terms like HUD, Fannie, Freddie, like you hear those thrown around in the background. That's just saying who now owns the property now that the foreclosure's been completed and it's real estate owned. And each one of those, so this is where it gets crazy, because each one of those has their own little rules for how you get to buy their properties. And they make up the rules as they go, it feels like sometimes. They've got them, but it feels like they're making them up as they go. And you have to learn them, this little very specialized, how do I do a Fannie Mae property? You may not do it again for 2 or 3 more years. So when you come across that, really everybody kind of feels like it's their first time. Unless you've done a couple this year, it feels like your first time every time you sell a bank-owned property. I just say read everything, talk to somebody who's done it before. It's a good time to take it to your broker and really get as much information as possible, because you want to set expectations for your buyer that whether it's HUD or VA or Fannie or Freddie or anybody else, the seller's making all the rules. Like what we think is normal is kind of out the window.
Can I jump in on something there real quick?
Yes.
Because I have a little bit of a concern, and I thought about this a little bit yesterday when we said this. Jenny's advice is absolutely spot on. This is not someplace you want to go develop your new line of business. But don't just check out at this point from what we're talking about, because what's very likely to happen to you is that you're going to go on a listing appointment and you think everything is cool. You get under contract and everything goes, and then you're halfway to closing and you find out at that point that there have been missed payments and things like that. And you may not seek out a short sale, but you may find yourself in one through no fault of your own. So that's why this is important. So just because you're sitting there thinking, okay, well, I'm just going to refer everything over to somebody, there are going to be times when you can't do that because you're already waist deep in this thing and somebody doesn't feel comfortable with you bailing on them at that point. So don't just assume I'm not going to pursue the business. It could happen to you anyway.
That's a really great point, Kenny. So I would say, since now we've put out here that that's a possibility, I mean, it could possibly be through fault of our own if we don't ask the right questions. So when should they ask the right questions, and what are those right questions?
So can I pipe in here?
Of course.
After our conversations yesterday, I started thinking about how can an agent best know, like the definitions and the terms and the best way to advise their clients. And HUD.gov is a website. It's a government website and everything starts there. HUD Handbook 4000 is the handbook that lenders use. So if you really want to know that much, you can go through that 3,000 pages of that handbook. But also there's a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and I can add this booklet, or you can go there. It's consumerfinance.gov. And there is a homeowner's guide to success if we can't make our payment. So that's something that I think all agents need to be aware of. And then also it's a good piece of information to give to your client, because it says, if I can't make my payment, does this fit my scenario? And it tells you a step to take. So it's really broken down in layman terms, and I think it's awesome. And then also there's a COVID fact sheet at HUD.gov that I can upload to the chat maybe. And I think those are two really good pieces of information to be aware of and start out as an agent. Might help you identify questions to ask and help you immediately if you find yourself knee deep in a situation.
That's great information, Susan. Thank you. Jessica Scott, I think I missed your hand being up a little bit ago. Did you have something?
I was just going to mention, when we're prepping to go to a listing appointment, one of the things I always do is I check the tax records for the les pendens, because that's going to be a little bit of an alert immediately going into the appointment if that might be an issue of something that you need to bring up. You know, it's difficult. You're going to a listing appointment and you're trying to talk to them about getting the listing, and then you're going to start asking very personal questions. So the better prepared that you are, the better that you know if you can ask those questions or not. And I will ask them, as we're working through the paperwork to do the listing, I'll get a little bit more personal. Are you current in your payments? Have you applied for forbearance? Have you ever done a modification? These are all things that we need to know in running the budget on their net sheet anyway. Also, are there any liens or judgments that they're aware of? This way we can put out any red flags and any issues ahead of time, which will help the whole process and help the buyer's agent as well.
That's fantastic. Good advice. Good advice. So any questions at this point from our viewers? Do we have any questions in the chat?
Jessica, would you put out that in the chat? Would you put out those questions? Would you mind?
Absolutely. Also, if you guys want, I know we're kind of in Midtown, our internet's down, so we're kind of on the phone. So if you guys also want to email me or any of the panel, we don't have any problems answering questions at any time to be of assistance with this type of stuff. We'd rather you understand it than not. Oh. So, and my email is easy, jessicascott@kw.
Okay, and you'll put those questions in the chat, Jess?
Yes.
Okay, good, good, good.
I'll chime in to kind of just make sure that the point I was making is clear. Of course, every one of us are professionals and have the ability to learn these skills. These ladies just did it last time, and so they've got years of experience, and you totally can rock this if you choose to. My comment was, know your strengths and know your business, and I believe mine are more not in this lane. And so I see it as a win-win for my client, because I trust them and I know that they're going to nail it and get our clients to the finish line, which is whatever that looks like for them. And so this can be your area. Go for it. That's great. And it requires a lot of time, energy, blood, sweat, and tears, which they will tell you, and money of upfront costs to learn this way of life. And so I just look at it as a lesson on what's your time worth. Do you have that time? Great. I choose to put my time in more traditional buyers and sellers where I can, work those, know that's going to happen. I get a referral fee by sending it to Susan, Jen, or Jessica, and that's a win for me. So I just want to share that with you guys. One thing I remember from, like Jen Sanders mentioned, was Now, you're going to be getting these calls. Hey, this is a pre-foreclosure on Zillow. So what I used to say to people, because it happened, if you go on Zillow and you see pre-foreclosure, it'll have the attorney's office, typically in Oklahoma City. And I've called that attorney's office and I say, hey, yeah, my client found this property as a pre-foreclosure on Zillow. And that poor receptionist who gets all these calls from us has to go, oh my God, it's just started. Like, we don't know. It'll be months and months and months. Like this, she's like, I'm so sick of this. This is ridiculous. So that's what I say to the clients who tell me that. I go, you know what? I've already called and here's what happens. So this is Zillow's way of capturing buyers or leads or clicks on their site because they're a marketing company. So we have to also be educated in what's going to be happening in the real estate world around us to be educated, like Kenny's saying. So we've got to just know what to say, who to refer it to, or learn it ourselves. That's my rant. Bye-bye now.
That was good, Jen. That was a good rant. Kenny, did I see your hand up? No? Well, based on what Jenny just was talking about, I think I'm going to pause everybody for a minute. I read this yesterday to the group. On page 240, our Gary's of Shift, Tactic 11, are Gary's comments on the people who should play this game. And here's what he says. They are successfully played by experienced real estate professionals. Lending institutions can tell if an agent understands renegotiating a loan, negotiating a short sale, or taking an REO listing. And they won't give you much time if they don't think you know what you're doing. Agents who naively believe these transactions are easily profitable and require a minimum of preparation find themselves waiting on hold or embarrassed by their inability to answer questions they are asked by their colleagues. Seek the business because you've studied it, learned it, and can successfully do the work. Seek the business because you are able. So that ties right in with what Jenny said. It's going to be your decision, but you just got to understand all of the different idiosyncrasies about this kind of business. And I can't remember which of you talked about the expense that can occur to the agent. Yesterday, was that you, Jess? Can you expound on that?
So it's a little different on the short sales from the foreclosures, but on the short sales, there's a way that we deal with proper communication to the buyer side because the seller may not be able to afford to have the utilities on if they've already vacated the property. That's not really an expense that we incur. Our expense that we incur in the short sales is our lost time. What is your time worth? On the foreclosure side, man, that gets really touchy. You're doing lawn care, rekeys, you're dealing with whatever the bank asks you to do. You're having to pay those contractors out of your own pocket. And then you got to take your befores, your during, your after photos. You got to turn in all your invoices and then pray that they pay you within 4 to 6 weeks, all the while chasing them down to get your reimbursement and hoping that they don't find a reason not to pay you. Having foreclosures is very expensive, and a lot of people forget that. Is that what you're talking about, Susan?
That is what I'm talking about. And then to piggyback on that, I would like, somebody talked about BPOs yesterday, and that the misunderstanding can be that if you're asked to do BPOs, that you're a shoe-in to get the business.
That was Kenny.
Kenny, can you address that?
Yeah, basically what I said yesterday is that as this activity ramps up, and it's funny because I actually got a call yesterday on one that's probably a 40-minute drive from here, and they wanted 2 other agents that I could tag along with. But you're going to get requests to do a BPO, which is a broker's price opinion, as they start some of these processes. And when you start getting a bunch of those requests via email, you may be thinking, oh, wow, if I go out and put a bunch of this effort in, that's going to give me a leg up with these servicing agents and potential lenders. And that is absolutely not true. They literally are just looking for somebody that's got too much time on their hands and is willing to go out and do a bunch of background and homework for very little pay, and they're very slow to pay. So don't get sucked into that where you think that the BPO is the ticket to getting foreclosure listings, because it's not going to happen.
Good, thank you for that. Debbie or Karen, do you have anything to add in here before we open it back up for questions?
Well, Jessica has her hand up.
Oh, Jess?
I was just going to also mention that when you have buyers that find a foreclosure or an REO, that sometimes the bank will require the buyers to turn on utilities for any type of inspections or anything like that if they plan to do inspections. So just be aware of that if you're on the buying side of a foreclosure or REO. That was all I was going to say.
Okay, good, good. That was good. Debbie, Gary? So what questions do we have? Are there questions in the chat line we need to address?
I have a quick piggyback onto something. What something Kenny said reminded me of another thing, because I know we all get these emails that are like, hey, Wells Fargo is hiring for foreclosure agents, and we have a webinar today at noon, and schedule a webinar. We all get them. Those are marketing emails. And so something that I think that I know if you've listed a foreclosure, you can agree with me on, anything that if someone's charging you to like join their website and they're going to get you foreclosure listings, don't do it. It's a scam. It's not how it works. You don't have to pay to get those listings. There are some memberships of like affiliations that you need, and there's software that you have to buy and things like that. But definitely they're so sought after that no one is like reaching out to people saying, hey, would you like to list bank-owned properties? So please don't spend any money on anything like that. Don't spend any money to buy foreclosure lists, and don't spend any money to get on a list of agents to possibly list foreclosures, because those are just marketing schemes.
Oh, I'm so glad you remembered to bring that up. I did not have that on my list from yesterday. Claire Faye, did I just see a question come up from you in chat?
So sorry. Yeah, I was just asking, like, if we have buyers that do have some cash. I mean, I'm just curious because I am still a little bit new at this kind of thing, but is this an opportunity for us to explain to people about cash for deed? And is that an avenue we should be going down for anybody, to help our sellers save their home or help buyers get a home who could help their friends or anybody? Or is that completely off the topic of today?
Who can answer that?
I can take a stab of it. So I will say it's probably pretty off topic, because it's pretty way down in the weeds for sure.
Okay.
What I would say from a standpoint of if you've uncovered a seller who is behind on their payments and might be losing their house, and you think that it is they're in an equity position that they could actually sell, so they're not upside down on it, definitely go find them a buyer who has cash and get it sold, but just do a regular old sale. I think when you say cash for deed or contract for deed is what's going through my head.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's what I meant. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and sometimes you get it all tied up in some weird stuff. Like I see short sales where you'll see them on MLS where there's like a $10,000 fee that the buyer has to pay, and
right.
There's a renter living in the house, and there's some other, and those don't tend to go as well for the seller as just a traditional straight out sale does.
Okay, that was kind of my question. I was just wondering, because I'd seen some stuff like that, and I was like, is that something that's a good thing or bad thing, or not something to talk about today?
Also, this is my job, so I might be a little bit selfish, but I'm always looking for ways that I'm going to get paid. So the way that I get paid in a transaction is when a buyer, when a seller sells and a buyer buys. So when you start doing those more kind of behind the scenes contract for deeds or things like that, those to me are more like what a wholesaler does, and less likely that you're going to earn a commission on those.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I've got Jennifer, Jamise Spears. Jennifer and Kenny, how do you get the listing?
Hey, Susan, it's actually Stacy.
I would let her go because she's by far the bigger expert. The problem that you have with all of the things that are being marketed to you, that getting those listings is no different than any other. You are going to have to establish relationships with the people who have them, which means you're going to have their contact, you're going to have to get to them, and you're going to have to continue to cultivate those. So that's a totally separate sort of a class, and it's not going to be germane for everybody here. So we probably need to just kind of set that aside and kind of talk about that after the fact.
Yeah, and I will tell everybody that we are going to have a class on these subjects once a month through the end of the year. And then I'm noticing in the chat line, there are a few people that believe that they really want to dive deep in this. And there's been some suggestions about outside educational resources that you can tap into. So that's good. Kenny and Gary, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this. Chris Herbert has asked a very important question. We are talking about a shift. What will this activity do to inventory in the future? So that's good. Kenny and Gary, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this.
Kenny, do you want to go ahead first?
Well, I can. You only have to ask once. You don't have to ask twice. The obvious answer is that when this starts to happen, it will increase inventory. It's not all going to be really good inventory because, as we've talked about, it's more difficult to process. It takes longer to get through, and most of the buyers that we're dealing with today are ready now occupant buyers. A lot of these kind of properties are going to be for investors and folks who are in the buy and hold in the flip market rather than as owner occupants. But it will ease some inventory because there will be some people that probably get out before they get in real trouble, hopefully, as they start to see signs that they can't hang on to something. And so that should loosen some inventory up.
I agree that it will loosen inventory up. I agree that it will also have an effect on appraised values of property as these come on the market. And I think it's imperative that we identify as many as we can now while we have a good seller's market to get a good price for these homes. Because what we don't want to get into is a situation like we had when the bubble burst the last time, when we go on listing appointments and they owe far more than what their home was worth in the market value at the time. So it's going to have an effect. It's going to increase inventory, but that inventory is going to bring with it changes in buyer qualification and appraisal values and things like that. I would like to, before I sign off, is to mention one thing. Jenny was talking about staying in your own lane and all this kind of stuff and being knowledgeable. Just realize that Article 11 of the Code of Ethics, and you can be in violation of the Code of Ethics if you're not knowledgeable and competent in the field of practice that you're engaging in. So it goes deeper than that we may think. This is something that can actually cause you physical pain as well as monetary pain if you get involved and somebody is unhappy with what you're doing. So be careful, get knowledge before you practice, and that's why we say refer and learn while you're referring, and then you can increase your knowledge. But to jump off in the deep end, it's kind of like somebody right out of real estate school wants to take a commercial listing. And you ask them, okay, what's a cap rate? And we don't have a clue what we're talking about here. So let's make sure we know what we're talking about. We need to know what questions to ask. We don't need to know the answers specifically, but we need to know what questions to ask to gain that knowledge. And I'm off of my soapbox.
Well, that was a very good soapbox, and thank you for bringing that up about Article 11 in the Code of Ethics. Because that is absolutely true. And then what happens if you're not in your lane and you're truly you don't have the knowledge and expertise that you should, then you are negligent, and that can be a big deal. So good, Gary. I'm glad that you brought that up. Debbie, what do you have to say?
Well, we had mentioned yesterday the questionnaire that Jen had from Alex Sheffrin. Is that right, Jen? And that there were some questions on there. It's proprietary, so we can't share the whole questionnaire. But Jen is prepared today to share some of those questions because Jessica Scott put hers up there, and Gary just said we need to be prepared to face those situations, as did Kenny. So, Jen, do you have a few questions that people could write down? We'll put them in the chat, but that people could write down when they're in a potential listing situation or talking to a potential seller and they want to broach this subject. Could you share some of those?
Yeah, I do. And I think I can. And I also think we should talk a little bit about what kind of questions you need to be asking your buyers too, to see if their temperament matches up with being able to buy a foreclosure.
Good.
So for a short sale, probably for most of us, you're going to run into that more than, so like I would, the listing side of things, I mean, the short answer to how you get the listings is you take a bunch of classes, you build a bunch of relationships. One year I went to 5 different conferences and spent $20,000 on travel and education to earn one client. So it's a whole other thing. But what we all will run into every day is a buyer who thinks they want to buy a short sale. So or a foreclosure. So I want to make sure everybody in our group at least has enough confidence to talk about what those are so that you don't lose them. They think they want to buy them until you ask the right questions, and then they learn that, oh, wait a minute, maybe we don't want to buy it. So I'll ask questions like, okay, great, what type, obviously, well, what type of loan are you doing? Well, if they're doing an FHA or a VA, they're probably not a candidate for it. Somebody put in the, or any sort of government-backed loan, really, they're not a candidate. Somebody mentioned a 203K loan in the chat, and that is an FHA loan product. It's a rehab loan. So that'll be one of my first questions. Do you, what type of loan do you have? And if they pass to the next level of like, oh, we've got conventional, then my next question is, okay, well, how much money have you got to put down? And if they've got, 5 or 10% of their own money, then maybe they're a candidate. So you move them forward a little bit. And you go, okay, well, what's your timeline? Because none of this happens on any sort of timeline that's in your control. So if there's somebody whose house is sold and they need a house, probably not an option. If their lease is up and they're trying to move that month, not an option. But if you find out that they still live at home or they're in their RV and they don't care, they can savor their 6 months or, month to month on their rent. Okay, maybe move them to the next step. So let me think, money, down payment. Oh, and then I'll always ask if there's anybody else that they could get money from if they need to, because you always need more money when you're buying a foreclosure. So like, let's say we get there and the whole roof needs replaced. Do you have the money to do that? I mean, so I go through those sorts of questions with them just to test them out. And most of the time people will self-select themselves out of the process. At that point, they'll go, oh, I didn't know it was that, hard to do. And then they'll agree to go on and not do those. If it's the flip side and you're sitting with a seller who you find out may have missed some payments and may be a candidate for a short sale. So they're, again, or if you go back to what Susan said in the very beginning, you're only a short sale if you owe more on your house than what the current market value is. So just because you've missed payments doesn't mean you are a short sale if you have equity. But if you think you're a candidate for a short sale, then you have to dig a little deeper. And the 3 pre-qualifiers, if you will, for a short sale is that you have to be behind on your payments. Well, you don't have to be. You have to not have the money to make your monthly payment, and you have to prove it. You can't just tell them, but you have to prove it. You have to be insolvent, which means you have to not have money in the bank where you could catch yourself back up. And and the third thing is you have to be upside down on the value of your house. So and then the fourth thing is you have to have a good reason. So what has changed in your life since you bought this house? So think about that you sat with your lender and you gave them all this information proving that you could buy it and that you can afford it. What's changed in your life now? And usually that's illness, divorce, job loss, something like that. So those are the 4 questions when you're with a seller to kind of sniff it out to see if they might even be able to do a short sale. Is what's happened in your life. So what has changed? Are you able to make your payments or get caught back up? And do you have more money, like bill-wise, is there more money going out every month than coming in? So are you insolvent and upside down on your bills?
So what I'm really hearing from all everybody put together is that we cannot be afraid when we are sitting down with a seller based on what we've just are going through and the CARES Act, et cetera. We cannot be afraid to ask the tough question about whether or not they're behind on their payment. We've just got to be able to ask that question.
And that's, so like if you want to talk processes, this is my seller's sheet, what's that called? Seller pre-qualification form. If you've ever taken seller listings through Keller Williams or you've gone through Full, they talk about this. So before you go over on a listing appointment, these are all the questions that you ask your seller, and in the basic format of the form that you can get off our Keller Williams KWU site, it's how much do you owe on your mortgage, are you up to date on payments? And you can add in some other things, like I'm going to add in what Jessica said, which is are you aware of any other loans, liens, or judgments that might potentially be against the property? And so you're sniffing that out really early in the process. If you ask that question of every potential seller, then you will uncover some at that point.
So I have a question for anyone who would like to respond. So with the market the way it is today and the multiple offer market, some of the ridiculously high offers that are going in on houses because they are trying to compete in order for theirs to be accepted, will this is that going to come to roost to be a negative when these houses go back on the market for those people that ended up winning those multiple offer situations and getting those houses, or will those properties hold that value based on what the market is saying today?
I've already been asked something very similar to that by somebody already this morning in relation to a property they bought back in December. And situation has changed. The property is not in as good a condition. They're not going to have means to be able to maintain it, and so on and so forth. And that was one of my first questions was, how much of the situation was closing costs? Did they have to have full closing costs, and so on and so forth? One thing that we have that's a little bit available to us, and we didn't talk about this yesterday, and I should have, because Susan, you and I had talked about this once before, because I just had a client kind of remind me of it, but things that have been very recently purchased in the interest rate climate that we're in, assumption may be a way out for some of those folks. If their situation changed drastically and it changed quickly, there may be an opportunity for an investor out there to come in and do an assumption. Those are, of course, qualifying assumptions. Some assumptions are going to want them to be owner occupants, but not all of them. So that is a potential way to talk about that. Because if you went out to buy a buy and hold rent property today, even though regular mortgage rates are still around 3%, you're probably paying 4.5 to 5.5 on a regular investor loan. So there is some attractiveness to the potential to assume if that's possible.
Oh, that's a great point.
Hey, can I add something? Hey, Kenny, since you're on that subject, why don't you explain to everybody what that would look like as far as other costs involved if they're assuming the loan, because you're going to have closing costs and realtor fees and all of that.
Well, yeah, the assumptions is not just, hey, I'm walking in and here's, you owe $100,000, and so I'm walking into your $100,000 deal, and all I'm doing is saying I'm taking over your payment. You've got to, depending on the structure of the loan and how they want to do it, there are the escrow accounts and things of that nature. I would assume, I don't know this yet, this will remain to be seen, but I would assume that the lender will want a current appraisal as well before they make any of those on qualifying. So it's not just it's not as easy as literally just saying, okay, I'm taking over your payment. But it is, again, it's a possible way out. It's going to be interesting to see. I don't know that that's, I don't know that's going to work in a lot of cases, but it's probably more favorable to this looming situation than it was in 2007, because back in the 2007, 2008 era, we weren't coming off historically low interest rates over an extended period of time.
Okay, good information. Can anybody that is actually on a computer tell me what else is on the chat line? So I'm on my phone and it's not as easy for me to see. Is there anybody else with questions?
Jen is typing in her questions that she just went over. And I have one more question along with those questions. And that is, tell us if it's one, to me, it's a question that probably needs to be asked of our buyers when they say, I want a short sale or I want a foreclosure because I understand they're a great deal. Will the lenders pay closing costs in either a short sale or a foreclosure situation? In other words, does the buyer have to have down payment and closing costs to buy a short sale, and down payment, closing costs, and possibly turn on utilities to buy a foreclosure? Is that true?
That's generally yes. They either won't pay anything, or if they will, it'll be a greatly reduced amount. Like a lot of short sales might do 1% of closing cost, if anything. Or if you buy a HUD-owned property, the most you can ask for in closing cost is 3%. So there's always, that's why I ask, do you have money, and who else in your family has money? Because you always need additional money. And then in addition to that, there are closing costs that an REO seller doesn't even think are their cost. Our title companies still charge them, but they'll say, well, we're not going to pay those. And so some of what we consider to be a traditional seller cost in Oklahoma gets added over to the buyer side too. So yeah, good point. I don't know a time, I can't think of a time when you don't need more money at closing for a short sale or an REO than normal. You just almost always do.
Wow.
I've had
her hand up. Jessica, do you have your hand up? Jessica Scott, did you have your hand up?
Well, I was just offering to help answer the question, but she
Okay.
did. You just
Okay.
never know if banks care about their net.
Okay. Susan, Tanisha has a question. Tanisha Bowen.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't have a question, more as a comment. I've had banks pay closing costs, because I've done quite a few short sales too. I've had banks pay closing costs, have good communication, and some have really bad communication. I've had them where they will limit the amount of the agreed upon commission with the seller. So I've had one where we were working it as a short sale, even though it didn't end up being a short sale, but the bank still insisted that I reduce the commission on it. And I have one that I'm actually dealing with now where it was a foreclosure. I reached out to them. Everything was going very smoothly. The secondary lien holder had never reaffirmed their position with the attorneys. It went through the foreclosure process, but we had already had a contract. And since the secondary lien holder never reaffirmed their position, we were unable to close because they wouldn't, even though, it would have been written off in the foreclosure once the primary lien holder had received once the primary lien holder had received the property back, then that secondary lien holder and any junior lien holders just would have went away. But since we had a contract before, the foreclosure, before it went to sheriff's sale and all of that, then that killed our contract. So it's definitely important to, just because everything is everything is going right and you have a contract prior to the foreclosure sale, if that junior lien holder is not communicating with you at all, then you won't have a deal, even though you think you do.
Okay, thank you, Janisha. Thank you for that. Okay, I think what time is it? I can't see what time it is.
It is
12:05.
12:01 and Chandra raised her hand and Nella, I think, is trying to say something.
Okay, Chandra, you go first and then Nella.
Okay, is there a situation where it's better for the client to just let it go to foreclosure? For example, I got a phone call from a friend. His mother's house was going into foreclosure. When I looked at it online, she owed more than the house is worth. It has significant structural damage in Broken Arrow on slab and throughout the whole house. And another agent from another brokerage tried to list it for 6 months at $73,000, and it said in the listing that seller couldn't take any less. The house is probably worth 50 something. The court record said they owed like 56, and his dad had passed away, which leaves his mother in charge. And his mother, he said his mother didn't really have the mental or emotional capacity to try to do a short sale, because I understand there's a lot of hoops that in a lot of hours that the seller has to. Is there, I mean, it's trying to be ethical and give this person the right guidance. Is there ever a situation where you can say, you know, it is probably just best if you let this go to foreclosure?
Jess?
Can I answer that? So, okay, so in that situation, I think short sale is always a better option to foreclosure if the seller is willing to work it out. The bank will determine if they're willing, what numbers they're willing to take through the appraisals and the BPOs. And if those appraisals come in too high, then it'll end up in foreclosure. But why not try to salvage it? The owner can recuperate from a short sale in about a 3-year time frame. In a foreclosure, what are we recuperating in 7 years? Plus all the other issues that go along with that. So my opinion is it's always best to try a short sale if they cannot salvage it, no matter what the condition is, no matter what the price is. If they only owed 52 or 56, you know, so maybe you list it a little lower, get an offer and submit it and see what the bank says. This is where it's our community services. We may put 6 months to 2 years into a property and it may fail, but I know that I tried to salvage that situation for that person and help them.
Right.
So Chandra, I have another outlook on that, in that sometimes you cannot want the short sale more than the seller. So if they don't have the energy to supply the documentation and go through that, then it may not be the answer for them. And then also, depending on their age and their physical abilities, foreclosure may not have such a devastating impact on them. Like if they won't ever want to buy another home or something like that. So I really think you have to look at the person as a whole. And the thing I learned from the very first is you cannot want the short sale more than they do, because there's parts that they have to play, documents they have to supply. And if they're not willing to, then a short sale can become impossible.
Okay.
Just my thoughts.
This person is deaf, and my friend says his mom has the mental capacity of about a 5th grader. So we'd have to do TDD calls. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome. I'm glad you asked. Nella?
Actually, I was just trying to find the chat. And I do very much appreciate this yesterday and today. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Claire, did I just see your name pop up again?
Yeah, I was just thinking for Chandra, is there a chance that anybody in the family could become a power of attorney and maybe they could handle the short sale and save everything? It was just a thought. I didn't know if it was a good thought.
Chandra, is that a possibility?
Probably with the son that I'm talking to.
Well,
Yeah.
I want you to really hear when you and her son are visiting. I want you to hear what Susan Oliveros is saying, and I want you to go to Tactic 11 in Shift because it gives you everything that they would have to do besides getting power of attorney. There's a lot of work that goes into it, so I don't know if he has a full-time job. Everybody's got to be on the same page in terms of the energy it's going to take for him to, when one of us is doing it, it's probably a different deal. This is our new. But if you're a relative of someone and you're also you have your own family and you have a full-time job, you better be ready what you're walking into. Okay, any last questions before we wrap up? More comments? Debbie, Gary?
I have one comment. My experience in being around short sales, being involved in them, and then watching our agents get involved with them is that we've all heard the expression that buyers are liars, and the buyers come forward and they say, I want this short sale. It's a great price. I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to play the game. And that lasts for about 2.5 to 3 months. And then their patience completely runs out. And we become part of the problem, and we are the ones that get the blame when we, in fact, are the ones that told them this was going to be a long, drug-out thing. So if we explain it properly, it's almost impossible to gauge how much patience a buyer has. But I do think there is a time frame that most logical people are willing to allow for something to play out. And when it doesn't play out in that time frame, they get irritated. So it's another factor to consider if you want to expose yourself to the agonies and ecstasies of short sales.
Yeah, we used to have a form in the day that actually, I can't remember what time frame we put in there, but if a buyer wanted to purchase the short sale, one of the documents that they had to fill out, they had to read it and they had to sign it, absolutely said, you have to be aware that this could last up to, and I don't remember how many, if it was some time frame that we put in or what, but we really tried to from the very beginning so that they couldn't come back and say, well, nobody ever told me, or whatever. So yeah,
I found that document this morning and I just loaded it into the chat.
Oh, good. I knew we had it from years back. So
also the things that Susan Olivares mentioned at the beginning, she emailed them to me and I got those loaded up. And there's a short sale addendum that's a GTAR form that's in our KW library on .loop. There's a bank owned acknowledgement, which I don't know if it's in our KW library, like I have it in my templates, but I think it may have disappeared. So I loaded it there, and then the two things Susan mentioned, if anybody wants to pull those down.
Perfect. Thank you. That's fantastic. Well, I think that we can go ahead and wrap up if nobody else is on the chat or raising their hand. Thank you all for participating in this. I hope it was helpful. And again, this isn't a one-time thing. We realize it's an important topic, and we are going to continue to address. We may do a couple of times a month through the end of the year. We just got to sit down and really develop our calendar on this towards the end of the year. We wanted to have these opportunities this week because we want to be ahead of this. Jenny Wallach said it yesterday that when the previous shift happened, we had been preparing for that shift for 2 years because Gary Keller was all over it. And so when the shift actually made it to Oklahoma, we were ready because we had been training everybody on it over that period of time. That's what we want to happen here. So that is our rationale for doing this. And again, whether you, I think it was Kenny who talked about this, and whether you want to take a deep dive and learn about this or not, you still want to be able to at least have a conversational knowledge about it so that you can then ask the right questions at these appointments. And then if you want to refer out to somebody, you can.
Susan, I hope I'm not being inappropriate here, but because of the leadership that you initiated at the very beginning of COVID, because of the leadership this company, Gary Keller, initiated also as at the beginning of COVID, do you want to share our market share numbers with this group? Is that inappropriate, or is that something you could tell them overall in general that we talked about yesterday?
Well, if I can put my hands on them, I can. Do you have them in front of you, Deb?
Well, I just remember for the overall group, for the overall group Keller offices, we had 24%. Gary, do you have them?
I've got
report.
I have them in the other room.
Oh, okay. You got them. Okay. I just think this is phenomenal. And once again, trained and positioned for a shift. So.
Okay. Here is for the month. Now, this is for the month of July. And these reports are based on the top 12 performing companies in the city. And the greater Tulsa area individual offices, Keller Williams Advantage is #1. And we have, for individual offices, we're at 10.2% market share. For grouped offices, which means all of our Keller Williams offices, we are, for the month of July, we closed 759 units for 23.9, I like to round up, 24% market share, which is unbelievable. When you have 30% market share, you literally own a market. And we have 24% market share, our grouped offices. In the individual offices, again, we were #1. Let's see, just a minute. Let me get the right form. We were #1. Keller Williams Preferred was #2. Keller Williams Premier was #4. Coldwell Banker on Sheridan was #3. So we have a tremendous command of this market that we've carried for 4 years, but in this COVID period, our market share has increased by 5 to 6% since the month of February, which is all because of all of you. It's not because of us. It's all because of all of you. And then, let's see, were those the ones you wanted me to share?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then in the grouped offices in the entire MLS market area, Keller Williams is #1 with 828 units closed, 18% market share. And here's what's really, I think is stunning, is the differentiation of the units for #2. So 828 units we closed in the month of July, and the next office is 679.
Mm-hmm.
The next office is 663, and the next office is 454. Those are other companies, Caldwell, Chenoweth, and McGraw. That's a big spread. That's a big, big difference. So we have so many of our agents are just absolutely rocking it, and that's what's holding us there. Cool stuff.
I did the lore yesterday, and I sent it to Jessica last night. I don't know if she's had a chance to look at it, but we outperformed MLS in all but one category, if I remember right, on the lore that I just did. So once again, we're doing better, which shows up in those statistics that you just read.
Yeah. So to Debbie's point, what is so important about this going into a shift, whenever that might be, if we can maintain a strong #1 position in market share, then we are going to be so perfectly positioned to be the company of choice that people want to deal with when we move into this shifting market, however that's going to look. So what's important is that we don't take our foot off the gas. We've got to keep our foot on the gas, stay focused, and do what we know how to do. That it, Deb?
Well said. It was awesome.
Okay, everybody. We're so glad that you joined us. I hope this was helpful. Stay tuned for more classes to come. And if you have any questions, reach out to us as leadership, and we're here for you.
Bye, everybody.
Panel, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes.
You're awesome.
Bye, y'all. Make it a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.